What if I told you that one simple word change in your questions could transform your coaching conversations from defensive to exploratory, from problem focused to solution focused? That's what we're going to dive into today as we explore the neuroscience and psychology behind why what and how questions open up minds while why questions often shut them down. Now, this shift may sound simple, but it's not easy. I have trained thousands of people in coaching skills, and I know that why tends to be a habitual go-to question that people are really attached to. And anytime we break a habit, work is involved. So let's look at the science behind the different types of questions that we ask, a few frameworks to help us navigate adopting a new habit, practical application and transformation of your inquiry, and ways to integrate and experiment with the concepts that we're going to discuss. Now, before we dive in, please take a moment to subscribe wherever you're listening to the show so that you never miss a moment of the strategies, tools, and resources, which, by the way, is the star in Star Coaches, that we bring to you every single week. And remember, you can always watch episodes and shorts on YouTube at Star Coach Show. So be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel where you'll get alerts every time we drop new information. Now, let's dive into the science behind question types. There is a neurological response to why questions, and it involves the brain's threat detection. When someone asks a why question, like, why did you do that? Or why did you make that choice? The brain interprets this as a potential judgment or criticism. And that's going to trigger our amygdala's fight or flight response. Now let's look from another perspective. Transactional analysis tells us that why questions often come from the critical parent ego state. That judgmental, harsh, condemning voice that unconsciously mimics our childhood authority figures. Well, if we are even unconsciously coming from that critical parent ego state, what are we doing to our listener? We are activating potentially their child ego state. So when we are listening and we hear, why did you XYZ? Why did you make that choice? Why did you do that? Our child ego state can get triggered. And if we're getting specific, it's usually the adapted child, the defensive or compliant, or that child part of us that seeks validation and is feeling judged. Another piece of our child ego state that could get triggered is the rebellious child, that defiant, resistant, acting out piece that's within all of us. Well, if you think about a critical parent and either a victim child or a rebellious child engaging, it doesn't sound like that's really going to get us where we want to with our communication, right? It puts us in a defensive positioning as the receiver of the information. So those why questions can create that scripted response within us from these ego states playing with one another. And it can cause us to feel like we need to defend what we're saying. We need to explain, get into excuses, or justify our actions. It's sort of a spin. It doesn't get us anywhere. It's non-productive. The other thing that why questions do is they tend to have a past focus. So when questions are past oriented in the abstract, even philosophical in these why, we can get kind of caught up in all this whyness of it. It locks us into a problem rather than a solution focus. So those are some of the issues with why. And for all of you who just love the why question, we are going to be talking in a little bit about some of the good times to use a why. But I want you to be thinking in this conversation about us using this in a coaching perspective or in a perspective where we're inviting someone in to engage with their brain and create new opportunity, new perspective. For all of you who have worked with me, you're going to the lens opening up to create new possibility, to open up perspective. And why doesn't usually tend to do that well. So let's switch now into the power of what and how questions. We talked about the critical parent and the rebellious child or the adaptive child. The what and how questions tend to invite us into our adult state activation. Now, what does that look like? Well, our adult state tends to be our rational, present moment, problem-solving capacity that processes information without contaminating it from our past emotional patterns. What the adult ego state does is allows us to step into exploration versus explanation. Let me say that again. Exploration versus explanation. So what we do is we invite our clients to be introspective, to articulate their thoughts, and to expand on their ideas, which ultimately promotes awareness. A key thing that we want to do as coaches and a key thing we want to do as leaders when we're using coaching as a leadership style. What, where, when, and how questions relate to something concrete. We focus on the present and the future where we're wanting to move. And what that also does when we're inviting introspection, we're thinking about possibility, it reduces defensiveness and increases engagement. So if we're still in that transactional analysis place of the ego states, what this does then is creates complementary transactions where adult to adult transactions happen instead of this parent to child. And adult to adult creates smooth, productive communication rather than triggering that crossed transaction that lead to conflict and pushback. Now, there is lots of research evidence around the concept of staying in this solution focused versus problem focused outcome, what it does to us as people. Let's just talk a little bit about it because we could create a whole episode just around the research. But studies do show that clients who answer solution focused questions describe significantly more solutions coming from that and significantly fewer problems than those who are asked to just kind of stay focused on the problem. Staying focused on the problem, using why questions to have us go deeper and deeper and deeper in a coaching conversation is not going to get any traction. It's going to be a bit like wheels spinning on ice. It's also interesting that there is a physiological impact of staying problem focused. Galvanic skin response research indicates that solution focused question groups experienced more parasympathetic activation and less stress than the groups that were problem focused. So there is evidence that supports this. I can tell you that through my decades of working with people, I have seen it again and again and again. So while I am not Brene Brown doing research and research and research, I certainly can say that experientially, I know that this works because I've seen it happen with client after client and situation after situation in the work that I've done. Now, we're going to dive into two frameworks to just kind of help us think this through and maybe give some additional tools that you might want to dive into if this interests you and you want to go even deeper. So, we're going to look at NLP, neuro linguistic programming, and solution focused principles. Now, some core NLP presuppositions that support what and how questions are that, first of all, when we stay in what and how questions, it supports clients' resourcefulness. Something that we say as coaches repeatedly is that our clients, and we don't just say it, hopefully we believe it all the way down to our toes, our clients are whole, resourceful, and creative. They're not broken. They don't need to be fixed. People have all the resources for their full development within them. So that fundamental NLP presupposition supports the belief that clients can find their own answers through exploration. And the way that we explore is to open up their mind with those what and how questions. Both NLP and solution-focused approaches emphasize that when we clarify goals, when we harness strengths and resources, when we focus on meaning and possibility and solutions instead of the problems, we build strength and resourcefulness and momentum. Also, when we stay future oriented, instead of looking to the non-productive past, people construct their destination. They create their maps and models of the world to build in what they want to move toward rather than everything that hasn't worked in the past. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't use the things that we have learned to determine how we want to move forward. But we don't need to sit in it, and why often drags us into analysis paralysis around what didn't work. Another philosophy that works in with this and is lockstep with coaching, it's what coaching is all about, is the client is the expert. So we as coaches believe that our clients have internal wisdom, that when we allow our clients, encourage our clients, and believe in our clients to access their existing knowledge and capabilities, they will move in the direction that they need to move. And that what we do in coaching is a collaborative discovery. And that's what and how questions facilitate. They facilitate discovery process rather than either having us put our fixer hat on and impose our solutions, or once again, get pulled into all the rationale or reasoning behind feeling stuck or spinning. As coaches, we believe that there is empowerment through exploration. And so we want to use questions that really encourage and explore possibility and potential rather than interrogate and build clients, defensiveness. So we really want to ultimately move our clients into confidence, ownership, resourcefulness, and what and how questions open the brain up to that. And that's exactly what we want to do. Now, For all of you who are saying, Meg, there are lots of books written around about why. Why is a powerful question. Um, some people say it's their very favorite question. I get that. And there are times that why questions work well. And I also want you to remember that in this context, we're talking about a coaching conversation. There is even one element within a coaching conversation that perhaps a why question might help the exploration, and that's around value exploration. Why questions can be powerful when focused on values rather than analysis paralysis, interpretation, past decisions, and even in that. We might use why around values. We can certainly still use what and how. So, what about perseverance makes it such an important value for you? Now, we could ask, why is perseverance important to you? A lot of the way that we ask questions, the music that we put with our words, is absolutely key in the way that they land. So if we know that why questions could trigger defensiveness sounding like they're coming from critical parent, then we want to be very cautious that if we, for whatever reason, choose to use why, that we're using it with the right music to our voice so that we're not sounding judgmental or critical. Now, purpose and meaning, sometimes if somebody's exploring purpose and meaning, Viktor Frankl, who is an incredible human being, and you might look up his writing. He says those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. Viktor Frankl survived concentration camps. His wisdom about the importance of purpose is, you know, just foundational. And I really encourage you to look up his work if you've never listened to anything or read anything from Viktor Frankl. The other time that why questions might work is differentiating therapeutic versus coaching contexts. So in technical problem solving, why can help identify root causes, but in coaching, we focus on solutions rather than fixing what's broken. So in, scientific and medical application, we want to understand the root cause. There are times that why and going into root cause is key. That just doesn't tend to be what we're doing when we're focused in coaching conversations. Now, let's move into some practical application and transformation. What is the problem with automatic why responses? Well, first of all, it tends to be a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. If we automatically default to why questions without considering their impact, I believe that we're not really stretching ourselves or building that inquiry muscle the way that we could. Why tends to slip out pretty quickly and automatically, which is why I encourage coaches to record their sessions and to listen back, especially when they're first learning this skill, because I'm willing to bet you'll hear yourself say why even more often than you realize that you do. So we want to increase our awareness of the habit so that we can make a different choice. We also want to remember that when we as coaches ask, well, why did you do that? Or why don't you just da-da-da? You're actually maybe unconsciously slipping into a bit of the critical parent ego state. Your client can perceive you as being judgmental, controlling, directive. And that's not building trust and safety. It's not believing in your client's wholeness. And remember, if we were to accidentally slip into critical parent activation, That's going to trigger our client's childhood dynamics. So if your client's child ego state gets triggered, whether it's their rebellious resistance, you don't understand, you don't know what's happening with me, we get into this ping pong ball match back and forth, well, why don't you do this? Well, that's not really our place as a coach anyway. So often, if we're caught in that asking why, we're very close to slipping into directiveness as well. Take a deep breath, blow it out, and think, how can I turn this why into a what or a how? The other thing that creates a problem with our automatic why responses is that it's very likely to reinforce a problem-focused conversation. That's what why questions do. They reinforce power dynamics. They move work onto the coach's task list rather than empowering the client. We get caught in having information that we don't even know what to do with because why just opens up it's not necessarily where the client even has agency. And so the coach ends up feeling like, what do I do with this? And it creates a lack of flow or movement the way that we want it to in the session. So my challenge to you is if you ever feel like you're spinning in a session, pay attention to if you're getting caught up in the why question. And finally, we can create excuse making on the behalf of our clients. Our clients feeling like they need to justify or explain rather than create their movement forward. And that's going to influence trust and safety, break down the client partnership, which we certainly don't want. We want that collaborative adult to adult coaching relationship with our clients. So let's move into some transformation techniques. I want to give you some ideas to practice with, to play with, and I would love to hear how these fall on you. So the first exercise that I want you to play with is the question translation practice. When you're done listening to this episode, take 5 common why questions that you find yourself typically asking. And I can say from listening to hundreds of coaching conversations, ones that I often hear are, well, why is this important to you? Or why did you make that choice? I also hear, why didn't you do XYZ? So I challenge you to come up with your 5 common why questions and then write them down. Transform each one of them into a what or how version. And I promise you, just give yourself a chance and every why question can be turned into a what or how question. So for example, why aren't you meeting your goals could become, what would need to be different for you to feel more confident about reaching your goals? So this is going to raise your awareness of your knee-jerk reaction why questions. If you don't know what why questions you're asking, once again, record your sessions, listen back. Maybe you're not, and yay on you. If you are, capture them, train yourself to turn them into what or how, and then practice them. Okay, I'm going to give you another exercise to practice with, the ego state awareness practice. And this is just a good practice as a coach anyway. My mentor coach tells me, take a breath. Take 3 heartbeats before you move into asking a question. And when you do that, be thinking about yourself. Be thinking about what you're offering. Well, in this ego state awareness practice, what I want you to do is before asking any question, pause and ask yourself, what ego state am I speaking from? Am I in the child ego state? Am I feeling overly emotional or defensive? Am I coming from the parent ego state? Do I feel like I know better than the client? Or am I in that I'm okay, you're okay adult ego state? Some ways of knowing that is if you're being directive or feeling judgmental, you might very well be coming from that parent ego state. If you're genuinely curious, you're likely coming from the adult ego state. Reframe and keep yourself in that adult to adult interaction, asking them, what would be most helpful to explore right now? If we remember that coaching is a partnership, it's not you're the expert fixing the client. When we remember that it's a partnership, then it's that much easier to remember to turn it over to the client. What do you need right now? What would be the most helpful direction for us to go in next? Let go of the ego and step into the place of partnership. Notice when your clients shift into the adult ego state responsive, if you're sensing some defensiveness, rebelliousness, maybe victim-like behavior, and use those adult questions to bring them back to their own resourcefulness. What's happening for you right now? What are you experiencing? Something as simple as that. You might say, I'm sensing a shift. What's that shift for you? What would you like instead? When we treat our clients as whole, resourceful, and creative, they will respond in like. You ready for another exercise? The solution-focused reframe is going to be my next exercise for you. So I want you to practice turning problem-focused questions into solution-focused questions. For example, why is this so difficult? Is a problem focused. Let's have it become what small step could make this feel more manageable for you? Or, well, why did that fail? Becomes, what did you learn that can inform your next approach? So listen to your questions. Once again, it goes back into tapping into when you're falling into why focused questions, turning those into what or how, but also being aware, am I focused on what's not working or am I focused on the movement forward? What's the direction they want to move in? I've got one more exercise for you to practice, and this is the future pull technique. Remember, a solution focus, well, you might not know this because we haven't talked about it, but a solution focused principle is that we get more energy and movement focusing on the future than the non-productive past. So when we think about the future pull technique, instead of asking about past problems, we want to pull clients toward future possibilities. Asking things like, what would success look like? How will you know when you've achieved your goal? What would be the first sign that things are moving in the right direction for you? When we help our clients put their eyes, put their focus on the direction that they're moving in and ask questions to help expand that, amazing things can happen. Because I know with the coaches that I work with that they tend to like questions to play with, I thought that in today's episode I'd throw some more questions out, just questions for you to play with to determine, do I like these? How can I make them my own? So let's talk about some what questions that might help with a client's clarity. Questions like, what specifically would you like to be different? What's working well for you that you could do more of? What resources do you already have access to? How about some how questions around process? How have you significantly handled Let me say that again. How have you successfully handled similar situations before? How will you know that you're making progress? How could you experiment with one small change? And let's talk about some when questions that would involve timing. When have you felt more confident about this? When would be an ideal time for you to take the first step? So we've looked at the impact of the different ways that we can ask questions. Let's move a little bit into integrating this, wrapping up some takeaways for you, and challenging you into what you're going to do next with this. So we've talked about the fact that this is science-based. There is research to support the impact of what and how questions versus why questions. The neurological evidence is that what and how questions activate exploratory neural pathways, and why questions tend to trigger defensive responses. There's solution-focused research that shows in multiple studies that improved outcomes come when focused on solution-focused questioning approaches versus problem-focused approaches. And the Neurolinguistic Programming Foundation is that the principle that people have all the necessary resources within them to support effectiveness of exploration rather than being all analytical in our questioning and get caught up in the past. So how can we practically implement this? I encourage you to start small. Once again, begin by noticing. We can't change anything if we don't even notice it. So begin by noticing when you automatically reach for why questions. And if you're unaware of it, record your coaching sessions with your client's permission. You don't have to record every single one of them, but record and listen back. That's one of the best ways to build your coaching muscles regardless. The second practical implication is to practice the pause. Create a space between your impulse to ask the minute the client's done. Pause, reflect on your actual question, and ask so that your client can explore. We have to remember sometimes, because as coaches, we want our clients to thrive. We want them to get where they're going. And it can pull us into trying to fix, and it's not our job to fix. So focus on solutions. Remember that your clients aren't broken. They don't need fixing. They need a partner in the process, which leads us to the fourth piece of trusting the process. Allow your clients to discover their own insights through your guided exploration with them. So I've got a challenge for you based upon what we've talked about today. For the next week, I challenge you to commit to eliminating why questions from your coaching conversations. Notice what happens to the energy, to the engagement, and to your client's insights when you consistently use what and how questions instead. And as I mentioned early on in today's show, this isn't just with your clients. This will impact your relationship with your coworkers, with your family members, and most especially with your children. So as we close today, I just want you to remember that powerful coaching isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the questions that help your clients discover their own wisdom. And by shifting from why to what and how, you're not just changing your language, you are changing your client's entire experience of possibility. I encourage you to try these techniques this week and let me know your results. Leave a comment below if you're watching us on YouTube. Leave a comment wherever you're listening and let me know, what shifts did you notice and how did your clients respond differently? You can always contact me through starcoachshow.com, which, by the way, is where you can pick up the guide that I developed based upon this episode, the Coach's Power Questions Cheat Sheet. It's going to help you walk through some of the things that we talked about. And it's my gift to you, and you can grab that at starcoachshow.com or in the link below this YouTube video. So until next week, this is Meg Rentschler wishing you the very best for your success. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others. We're all here on this earth together to do the heavy lifting together. So let's do that. Have a great week.